Hi, this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And oh, wow, I have a fantastic story to tell you today about this book that I have just fallen in love with. And the author is Kent Heckenlively, and his book is amazing. And here it is. Wow, the King of Italy. Now, what fantastic title. The King of Italy. Hi, Kent.
How you doing?
Okay, it's so great that you're here today because I tell you, I just fell in love with this book. It's described as a sweeping family saga spanning decades, and it is, and it's more than that. It's a page turner. It's a delightful book, so well written. It's amazing. So, you can tell us a little bit about yourself before we start talking about the book because you published a lot of books and this is your second novel, and it is a saga. It's epic. It's fantastic.
Thanks so much, Pat. Yeah, so a little bit about my background. I'm trained as an attorney. About 20 years ago, I became a science teacher. So I'm a California public school science teacher. And I've always wanted to be a writer. I was one of those kids who, when I was 14 years old, I was sending science fiction stories into Analog magazine and doing all that kind of stuff. And I was really interested in historical fiction. And so that was what I wanted to do. And during my 20s, I was taking all the writing classes, going to really well-known writers and trying to get all the information and and also trying to have a career in the film industry. I wrote, produced, and directed an independent film, which got out there to the festival circuit. But then things got off track. I got wonderful reasons to get off track, got married, had kids, but I was always writing and but thinking that I was going to become a fiction writer. But lo and behold, in about 2014, I came across a great story about a crusading doctor, Dr. Judy Mikovits, who'd written about chronic fatigue syndrome and thought she discovered a new virus. And I'd written enough in terms of blogs and for websites that I thought it was time to do a book about her, and that became Plague, which ended up becoming very well known. And so that kind of launched me into the nonfiction world. And I've published 18 nonfiction books so far. Two of them have been New York Times bestsellers, but I've always had part of my heart in fiction. And while I was getting uh, all these jobs from the publishers to write these nonfiction books, I was always saying, I got to spend some time doing fiction. And King of Italy was something that was very close to my heart. I'm half Italian. On my mom's side, she was full-blooded Sicilian, actually. And my grandparents came over from Sicily, met in the United States. And the Italian side of my family is a storytelling. It's a storytelling culture. And I just loved hearing the stories about Italy, my grandparents. And there was always this family story that we were related to the royal family of Italy in some way. And, that there was somebody was an illegitimate son or daughter of a prince or a duke sort of thing. And so it just got me interested. And I started reading about Italian history, and I came across the fact that from 1870 to 1945, Italy had its monarchy, and not many people know that. And so I was thinking, wow, how can I construct a story kind of between Italy and America and talk about questions of family loyalty, questions of power, if much about the Sicilian culture. If you cross a Sicilian, you will live to regret it. And I thought, oh my God, there's just so much richness in that history. And at the same time, there's this culture of vengeance and retribution. There's also such incredible warmth in the Sicilian culture, and it's a very communal organization. So I thought, as much as Italians have just been depicted in a great deal in the mafia and everything, there's also this other part which is looking towards improving the community, and that's why I wanted to create a story which really had all of those facets of Italian and Sicilian culture, and really just tell a great story that will hopefully be relevant to other people's lives. And I'm really so thankful that you enjoy this because as I've been really successful in the nonfiction books, I've had a number of people in my life, like my father-in-law, especially. He was always saying, "You got to get King of Italy published. You just need that is a great story,"
Well,
and
I'm
that's
glad
why
you did. I'm glad you
that's
did because
dedicated to him. Yeah.
I love it from page one. Now, I will tell everybody that I've spent some time in Sicily. I love Sicily.
Hmm.
It's just fantastic. And you really took me there again. And that's what you're going to be doing for readers. It starts off in Sicily, and we're going to be going eventually to San Francisco, but there's so much story in here. As you mentioned, people don't know that there was a king. And so we're going to lay some foundation for that. And so I think that you've accomplished something really great here with this story. Sicily is a marvelous place, and I think that people need to know more about it. And you take us there with this wonderful story. Tell us about Vincenzo Nicosia.
Yeah. So Vincenzo is one of those characters that writers often discover. And I'd always been intrigued when I heard novelists talk about characters who just took over a book. And Vincenzo was like that because my original intention was not to have Vincenzo be the main character. I was more interested in the character of Rosina and Giacchetta. But Vincenzo just came onto the scene and I set him up and I was like, wow, this is my guy. This is the story. I got to tell the story of this young Sicilian boy whose father is put in prison and he blames the Duke for doing it. Then during the 1920s, he's given an opportunity by Mussolini, who is coming to power, to take vengeance against the hated Duke. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to because one of the things that I've always found interesting about Italy in terms of the entire European history is when we usually talk about World War II, it's just about the German side and Adolf Hitler. Okay, Hitler coming to power in 1933. Okay, got it. But there's another story and a deeper story, which is Mussolini came to power in 1922 and essentially reigned until 1945. And so that's a deeper story because Mussolini was looked upon as the model by Hitler. And so I thought that it was really interesting. And what happened in Italy is although Mussolini took power, he wasn't quite able to gain full power. You still had the Pope, you still had the monarchy, which was trying to keep Italy together. They didn't want to dissolve into civil war. But so there are all these factions, and Americans who are familiar with World War II may know that after the successful invasion of Sicily, the Italian king switched sides and arrested Mussolini, but Mussolini escaped. And I thought, there's a wonderful story. There's a wonderful mid century story in Europe that hasn't been told. And to do it through the guise of a family who interacts with these historical characters, keeping it accurate to the historical record, but just saying, hey, there may be a different way of thinking about World War II from the Italian perspective.
Exactly. And from the Sicilian perspective, poor
Yeah,
Sicily, they've been invaded by everybody over.
yeah, and I love it when authors say there was one piece of information which just around which the entire book wrote rotates. And so for me, it was the discovery that Sicily is probably one of the most conquered places on earth because it sits in the middle of the Mediterranean. So it's been conquered by the North Africans, by the Italians, by the French, even the Vikings conquered Sicily. And so it's like the Sicilians have just been kicked around for thousands of years. And the fact that shortly after Italy was unified, the Italian Navy bombarded Sicily. Sicilians have a different perspective on power, which is okay, everybody here is out to screw us. And how do we respond?
That's true. Really, when you look at it, Sicily is the largest island in the Mediterranean. And there's so much there that people want, or on their way to take Italy or France or wherever, they use it as a stepping stone. But still, the Sicilian personality is different. It's different from Italians. It's completely different.
It's almost you almost get the feeling like it's such a beautiful place. It's
Oh,
in the middle of the Mediterranean. It's warm. It's friendly. Strong families. But I think the typical Sicilian perspective is like when they meet somebody new is like, okay, what are you planning to do to me? What's your deal with me? And it's like the small town that my grandmother was from is called Licodia Ubea. All right. And so you go and you look at the derivation of that name. And Licodia is from Arabic. And the original Arabic was Al Qaeda, the base. And then Ubea, so that's when Sicily was conquered for 500 years by the North Africans. So Sicily is under Muslim rule. And then Ubea is from the Greek, Uboa, because there was a Greek colony there before that. So you're thinking, okay, the Muslims conquered Sicily, the Greeks conquered Sicily. Who hasn't conquered Sicily?
it's really such a wonderful country. In a way, I don't want to encourage too many tourists because I don't want them to ruin it. I spent, as I said, quite a bit of time in Palermo and then in Syracuse, which I love. Oh, that's a fantastic place. And in between all of that, you find all the leftovers of all the invaders. There's still a lot of American tanks and things left over as part of the landscape now.
Yeah, the best preserved Greek temples in the entire world are in Sicily.
Yeah.
And the Valley of the Temples, I've been there. It's just like
Oh,
gorgeous.
I've been there at sunrise. To be there when the sun rises on a beautiful day, and it is the best preserved.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really curious. I'd like to ask you a question. So you said you kept racing home to read this book. What, and you're an expert on literature. What was I doing so right there?
First of all, you introduce characters along the way, but one thing leads to another, and one character leads to another. And as we swing from Sicily over to San Francisco, it was such a revelation in how you capture both of these places so beautifully.
One of the things that I get from readers is that they would try to predict the actions of the characters, and they
Oh
were
yeah.
continually surprised.
Oh, they were. I was, and I love how you introduce. There's one. It's so funny. Um, One of the things that I loved is you introduce a bad guy, a little pint-sized bad guy that Alex fight has a little contretemps with, and I thought that was so great, good. So I don't know what to give away. So we have Vincenzo in San Francisco, and what you put him through. He goes through a lot before he leaves Sicily, and we can't tell everything because why people. It is part of the reveal. Reveals are great. That's what puts excitement in a book. You if you don't know what's going to happen, and you keep turning the pages because you want to know and because you care about the characters.
I was always thinking in writing this book that I wanted my characters to have certain moral dilemmas. And so that's why I feel like one of the things that I did well was even characters who you can think of as bad guys, you understand why they're doing what they're doing. And in some circumstances, you would find the way they do things to be admirable. So Vincenzo hates the Duke because the Duke was responsible for his father going away for a long period in prison. We understand that we all love our families, hopefully, and we understand that we'll stand up for our families. But where does that cross the line into something that is bad? And so I wanted to have that question being there. And then all the other people are always making decisions. One of the characters who I really loved writing was Augustus Patrio, because he was a character that I had never really seen in historical fiction. But when I had done non nonfiction historical research, I ran across many individuals like him, like A.P. Giannini, who founded the Bank of Italy, which later became the Bank of America. And so there were all these figures from the early 20th century who really were businessmen, but they looked upon business as a way of helping the community. And so, as Vincenzo is making bad decisions, he's faced with Augustus Patrio, who is the idea of the good businessman. So Vincenzo will work very hard. He'll work harder than anybody else, but yet he will also engage in violence. And then the situations are such that you go, huh, was that justified, that violence that he did? And so it's the reader with, I'm not sure if that was a good thing or not. And so I always wanted to have that interior dialogue. And Vincenzo is confronted with a moral dilemma at the beginning of the book, which is whether he should take vengeance against the Duke. And at the end of the book, I have his nephew, Alex, faced with a very similar decision. Should he take vengeance against the King of Italy, who he's being told to take vengeance against them by his commanding officer in the United States Army? And so because one of the things that as much as I love The Godfather, and when I was writing this book, I was very conscious of the Italian American depiction in history. And although I love The Godfather, it goes to a very nihilistic place. And I thought, I don't want this to go to a nihilistic place. I want the, I keep thinking about like the evolution of a man who is a member of his community starts with being a warrior. You're a soldier when you're young, and hopefully you're a diplomat when you're old, kind of thing. And you figure out how to you in order to be a complete man, you have to have the potential for violence, and then make the decision not to engage in violence. And I wanted that male positive male path to be in the story, because in The Godfather, you have the ideas you start with the violence continues, and then the violence consumes you.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to go to that place. I was like, okay, given all the terrible things we know about the world, how can we choose maybe a different path? And also to know sometimes that decision to go the right way or the wrong way can just hinge on a couple seconds of your life. And I thought, that seems realistic to me. And so they always say fiction is how we tell the truth about things. And so I wanted this to be a story which looks at the history and what happened. And many people don't realize that Italy was on the verge of civil war after World War II. The forces were moving. And so I depict that history, and I suggest in a fictional form, gee, there may have been a couple decisions that a few individuals made that avoided civil war. And let's think about that in our own lives. Hopefully, none of us are involved in things as large as that. But individually, we can all make decisions to pursue a positive rather than a negative path. So,
Exactly. And you do that. This is what, whether it's with Patra and his this lovely list that he has of 2,000 names, people he knows, people he's done something for, people who help him, people he's helped. I thought that was so beautiful. I hope people are inspired to do that kind of thing. Help people, and then they'll help you in the end too. All of this, what even the smallest, sort of, you introduce these characters and we don't know where they're going to go. Everybody is going to play a very important part, whether it's the nun. I
mhm.
love the nun. I love that. I love the ring, the whole idea of it. This is absolutely cinematic. And to tell you the truth, much more so than The Godfather. It's just too violent. It's violent over and
Right.
over. And there's no redemption. There's no. Everybody seems to be evil. In this story, you have such a diverse and really eclectic assortment of people.
Yeah.
and the good, the bad, the good who want to be bad, and the bad who want to be good. All of that blends in, and yet you can take one little character. I mentioned the pint-sized bad guy, Carl Munt. I hate him, but I love him because
Yeah.
the minute you introduced him, I said to myself, Kent is just so smart. Because first of all, even taking the name Carl Munt was a perfect name for this little pint-sized monster. Did you love writing that part?
I really did because everybody has had that experience of being picked on by a bully, and I kept thinking, we one of the ideas I came up with. I loved at the beginning of the movie Goodfellas. This young guy is working for these mob guys. His grades go down. Uh, his parents get sent his report card with all D's and F's, and his parents say he can't work for the bad guys anymore, and the bad guys go, "Oh, don't worry, we'll take care of it." And so the next scene, you see him beating up the mailman, and I thought, "Oh, that's friggin' hilarious." And I was thinking, like, okay, everybody's had that experience of being picked on by a bully, but what if, like, your uncle knew how to get people? And what if you, little kid, little boy who's getting picked on, has an uncle who's like ruthless? What would he tell you to do? And you're on his side when he's going after Carl Munt. And I
Yeah,
thought, oh, this is really funny.
it is funny. It takes up only a few pages, but anybody who reads this book, that will be one of the things they will remember. And how did you pick that name? Because that name is such a good bad guy name, even for a pint-sized bad guy.
I don't know. I spend a bunch of time with names because I really want them to work. And I'll say them out loud to myself. There's just something harsh and Germanic about Carl Munt.
Yeah,
And so it's just, I don't know, maybe it sounds like murder.
it's
It just
perfect.
sounds like a
It
bad guy
it
name.
it is perfect. Absolutely. And that whole scene really sets the tone for Alex. Up to that point, that little scene reminded me of the Bing Crosby, because there's so much Catholic stuff in this book. It reminded me of the Bing Crosby movie Going My Way, where he teaches the kid to fight back. He teaches him to to box. Yeah, that little scene. It's a little scene in the movie, but you still remember it years after you've seen the movie. And
Yeah.
the same thing with this little scene with Carl Munt. It just a little monster. And I was so happy with that M sound, and I all I think now is Munt. So names and names are important. Whether it's funny now, I will never look at Pellegrino water without thinking of your book. So
Okay. Yeah.
all of these little things help, because what we want people to do is read this book. It's really we'll talk now. Let's talk a little bit about the women characters, because you write women characters so well. And I don't want to tell why we have a nun in there, but what she does. But I love that little scene. Again, a very cinematic scene. Did
Hmm.
that just, did you, did it come to you? Did Vincenzo inspire that? How do you get these little scenes like that?
Growing up with a Sicilian mother, the women in the Sicilian culture are very strong. I remember one time I was in my early 20s, and my mom had was watching Oprah, and they had a story about children who had questions about their parents that they'd wondered for their entire lives. And so my mom called me up and said, "Hey, honey, I saw this Oprah show, and I was wondering, do you have any unanswered questions about me? Are there things I haven't shared with you?" And I said, "Mom, you've never had a single unexpressed thought in your life. So no, I know everything about you." And that was just my experience with the women that I grew up in my life within my life. They were always said everything that was on their mind. And so I think when I come to write women characters, I'm always certain that I make sure that I explain their motivations, that they're always acting like the men, they're always acting in response to something. Everybody has a past. And so the nun who offers mercy in a certain way to Vincenzo, I thought, she's got to have a story. What's her story? She won't have kids because she's a nun, but maybe she has nephews who've been involved in violence and seen the toll of that. And so she looks upon Vincenzo as somebody like her nephew who, if he doesn't get out of this place, he's going to die.
Exactly. This is what comes, I think it's so exciting. Now, you wrote this book over quite a few years.
And one of the things that was funny is I actually uh, I wrote it in my 20s, and it sat on the shelf for 30 years.
Oh my
And,
goodness.
and I and I think that what I needed to do was, in order to write the last half of the book, I needed to age a couple decades because I needed to finish the story. And so when I say it's a young man's story, but also an older man's story, I felt like I needed to be both of those things because as I'm older, I'm much more peaceful. And not that I was ever violent or anything, but it's like that rage that you have as a young man starts to dissipate, and you start to maybe see the world a bit more clearly and go, oh, okay, there are all these factors, and yeah, you can go one way. And so one of the scenes that I think that I needed to be older to write was when Alex is in Rome after World War II, and he's working with the Allied Control Commission, which is trying to put together the Italian government. He has long conversations with an older Italian politician, and I find that their conversations are very powerful. But I could never have written them as a younger man because I needed to understand the older man's perspective, which is, yeah, the world is screwed up, and yeah, we're trying to fix it. But I'm an old enough man to know that just because I want things to go better doesn't mean that necessarily they will. But I'm going to do my best here. And I
Well,
think to have that understanding that, you can have great intentions and the world can still go to hell is something that is real, and people who've been in the fight understand.
and what's great about, as I said, it's cinematic. This, oh, from it goes through many decades, and the wonderful thing about it, I can see each of them as a streaming video already. But tell us, you've done, of course, you've lived a Sicilian life, but you also had to do a lot of research. Did you know as much about the invasion of Italy during World War II? Which a lot of Americans don't know anything about that. That's where the Americans landed to get ready
Yeah.
to take over Europe.
Yeah. So I did end up doing a lot of research on it. So I did have to educate myself on that. I had not had anybody in my family who participated in that invasion. That was just my own research. But I think it was also the fact that when I went to rewrite the book and update it, I had lived enough that I could understand how things, you know, great plans for the invasion of Sicily run into reality. And it may not be what you think it's going to be, but you just have to get the job done. And that's what Alex exemplifies. He's just going to get the job done, whatever it takes.
When I was in Sicily, I said I traveled around the country. I was looking at all the historical sites, but I was particularly looking at the American military sites where the American military was staged. I met Italians who were children at the time, so they were there when the Americans arrived. When the Americans arrived, and they were talking about the GIs and how they would greet them and how their parents would come out and welcome the GIs who were coming in with their jeeps. And they remembered it so clearly. And they do remember getting candy from the GIs, and of course getting food because things were really bad in Sicily. Sicily was neglected by the Italians. They were taking everything they could out of it, and they weren't doing much for Sicily.
Yeah. Yeah. It was wonderful to write. And the thing, Sicily not only gets invaded by outsiders, but they get screwed by the insiders. They get screwed by their own politicians, by the local politicians, the mob bosses, the Italian representative. It's like you're I think you're the average Sicilian has the perspective of, hey, look, just because you're a Sicilian doesn't mean you're on my side. You might be trying to screw me over too.
That's true. I had some experience in San Francisco, and particularly somebody who was working in the Italian community who was doing bad things Sicilians in that community where they were trying to
Mm-hmm.
take over the land to build new buildings. Politicians, it doesn't matter where they are, this kind of thing happens. Actually, you worked for a senator, right?
Yeah, I worked for U.S. Senator Pete Wilson.
You also are familiar then with the way politicians talk, which I think comes through too.
Yeah, I grew up in a wealthy area of the Bay Area. And so I always say that I had a really privileged upbringing in that I could literally go to the house next door for a party and meet Joe DiMaggio. And one of the guys my dad was close to wrote the textbook on California real estate law. I would throw the football around with members of the Oakland Raiders. And so I got to see behind the scenes. And I think that's why I have a comfort with writing about powerful people, because you saw people who were in the public eye and they were very good. Like, for example, we were very close to this disc jockey called Dr. Don Rose, who was the biggest thing in the Bay Area during the 60s and 70s. Loved the man. He was just fabulous. And down the street, we had the basketball player Rick Barry for the Golden State Warriors, who was like the Michael Jordan or LeBron James of his time. Total jerk. And so just because you're famous doesn't mean you're nice, doesn't mean you're going to be a jerk. I got to see all those shades of celebrity and how people respond to them. And I just thought, God, this world is so rich. And in a lot of stuff that I see, it's one version or the other. It's like The Godfather, all dark. No, it's not all dark. The kind of garbage that politicians will put out. Oh, we're all wonderful, great people. Nah, don't quite believe that. There are some good people there. And hopefully, over time, the good people get realized and the bad people get revealed.
I'm glad that you have lots of great connections and that you've all already done a film because I'm sure that you're already thinking about this as a film. You can imagine it. And I can see it as a streaming because you have all these decades to go through. It's really an epic story following this family along, following all of the people. And your dialogue is so great. I love, for example, even just a simple thing of what the Duke says. We won't say at one point where the Duke has a few minutes to make his thoughts clear, and how he really talks about Mussolini and what's going to happen with Mussolini. And he's so
Yeah.
right. You can never trust Mussolini. All of these little things, all these little speeches that you have, whether it's Carl Mundt or anybody else, you capture these characters so beautifully. So you haven't been optioned yet?
No, I have not, but somebody in Hollywood has read it and it has had the same reaction that you have. And in the new year, he says he's going to try to get this book to a number of producers.
I think it would be just great. I would love to see the deck that they're going to do on that one because I'd love to see who they would think of to play all the parts. I have my own images in my head already. I always say if I'm 10 pages into a book and I already start seeing it as a movie in my head, I know the book is going to be really great. I didn't need 10 pages with yours. I read one page and I said, oh, that's it. That's it. I need this. Your book is so much fun. One after another, you've come out with the right things, like the Model T, for example. I love that scene where we won't say why the Model T is there, but we're in Sicily and suddenly you read about, oh, somebody has a Model T, which my grandfather had a Model T. So I visualize that so perfectly. And I could right away, at that point, I said, oh, this is a movie. I can see a Model T in Sicily. It's really cool.
Good. Excellent. I really enjoyed writing it, and I hope people enjoy reading it. So, again, take a look at the book itself to remember what it looks like.
The
And
King of
my
Italy.
my mug next, the King of Italy.
And it is a really wonderful book. I think you've done a beautiful job on it. Just a fantastic book. So I hope that people will get this book and read it and discover more about Sicily, about Italian history. And Kent, I think you're just fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I hope that when you have a deal, please come back on Joy on Paper live and we can talk about it. Okay?
Okay, will do.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bye bye now.
Thank you.
It was so much fun to talk to Ken Lively about his book, The King of Italy. There are so many wonderful things about this book. It is a page turner. It is beautifully written, absolutely fantastic. For historical fiction, it is at the very top, an absolute top. And you will enjoy it. I hope that you'll get it and you'll have fun like I had trying to imagine who's going to play all the parts in a streaming video series. It goes through decades, and that's exactly what we love to have in a streaming series. So please get this book. And meanwhile, please subscribe to Joy on Paper Live. The algorithm with YouTube is very important. So if you would subscribe, just push that subscribe button right now. Just click it. That's it. It only takes a minute. And make sure that you also share and make a comment because YouTube loves comments. So please just make a comment and then I can bring you more interviews with fantastic authors. So please get this book. Again, The King of Italy. It's available wherever books are sold and on Amazon and on Barnes and Noble. Thank you. Bye bye now. Again, just please subscribe. Click. Bye bye now.